In terms of where ESG is today, it's quite an evolutionary process over the past several years, and it's rapidly moved from a nice to have to a way of doing business, really. And at the end of the day, organizations are really realizing that there's a huge opportunity in focusing on ESG broadly because of a couple things. Number one, it really impacts engagement, productivity, innovation, and as well as the bottom line, essentially. And so people are starting to see that there's a huge impact in focusing on this area in a long term capacity, right? This is not a short term play, it's a long term play. So that's really some of the benefits that organizations are starting to see. But the other piece is that because it is becoming a way of doing business, there's a lot more pressure on organizations due to the socio-political environment that we're in, due to increasing SEC regulatory disclosures on ESG issues and initiatives, as well as pressure coming from investors, shareholders, and finally, and certainly not least, talent, employees within these organizations who are looking to work for and stay with organizations that actually care about ESG. So I think there are primarily nine key components that I've discovered over my experience and research to really having an effective strategy in place. And again, bearing in mind this is a long-term play, and it's important for organizations to stay committed to the strategy. First and foremost is having the active engagement and support from senior leadership, starting from the top, from the CEO. Secondly, and these aren't necessarily in order of importance, but they can fluctuate depending on where the organization is in its ESG journey. But I
Mm.
will list them. Secondly, I talk about education. So helping organizations and individuals within those organizations understand why we should care about ESG, what ESG actually is, and actually helping people understand what those behaviors are to ensure that we're creating an environment that supports ESG and ultimately leads to inclusion, which I know we'll be talking about later. Third piece is really putting in place accountability and metrics, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So we want to make sure that we're holding our leaders accountable for supporting these initiatives through performance management and the like, and as well as the fact that we're putting in place metrics to ensure that every aspect of the employee life cycle, from recruitment to development to engagement to retention, has metrics within each of those verticals to ensure that we're achieving success across the entire life cycle at all times. And the other piece is really around advocacy. So it's more and more important in today's society, particularly given the emotive aspects of ESG as a topic, to really ensure that organizations have a voice in this space, not only within their own organizations, but are collaborating with other organizations in the for profit and non for profit sector to advocate and have a voice and talk about why organizations should really care about this. And then finally, it's really about creating that environment within the organization to ensure that people feel at the end of the day, and this is really the S in ESG, that they feel valued and heard, and that there is a sense of belonging within the culture. And there are absolutely certain leadership behaviors that are particularly important in today's efforts in today's society. I think one of the key elements is really around empathy. And that is related to the complexity of the environment of which we live today, both, again, as I mentioned earlier, politically, socially, socioeconomically as well. And these are topics that are not easy to deal with. So, as a leader, leaders need to be conscious of listening to their people, listening to their constituents, and actually hearing the message and taking it on board. So, another key component is learning agility. There's a lot of research out there over the past several years, and certainly most recently, that learning agility is a key predictor of success as a leader. And that means that as a leader, you are learning from your experiences and taking that learning on board to adjust your behavior accordingly and more effectively in the next situation. And then finally, a piece of research that I reference a lot, which I have found very useful in terms of effective leadership, is really something called the 6 C's by Deloitte. And it really focuses on the key components of an inclusive leader in particular. And they are the following, and they're very much linked to empathy and learning agility. But we've got cognizance, so being aware of your people and yourself, courage, having the courage to take risks, curiosity, again, asking questions, trying to learn, cultural intelligence, understanding and appreciating the differences in people that we work with and interact with, collaboration, being able to build teams where individuals feel comfortable collaborating across one another and actually feel again that their voices are heard and that they are valued. And then finally, commitment, really being committed to inclusivity and to leadership and to creating that inclusive environment. There are a number of different aspects to the impact that an effective ESG or DEI strategy can have. First and foremost, there's brand reputation. There's a lot of work and discussion out there now about ESG. It's important for organizations when they do talk about it to actually do something about it. Otherwise, you can get into a situation when you have brand issues, the concept of greenwashing. So, in some ways, it's actually worse to say you're going to do something about it and not follow through. So, the brand piece is absolutely critical, both positively and negatively, but we'd like to focus on the positive because we want to make sure we're building that brand in this space. There's also the impact on engagement and retention within an organization, and that has a short term benefit in terms of retaining your people and keeping your people productive and engaged, but also a long term benefit from a financial perspective as well. It's costly to lose people, to rehire, to retrain, and have that gap in terms of their readiness for the role. So there's a long term piece to that as well. And then finally, if you think about the continuum of what we're looking at in terms of success, when we go from engagement to productivity, at the end of the day, there is a positive correlation proven by a number of sources of research to the bottom line and to profitability. And in fact, organizations that focus on ESG are 6 times more likely to be profitable over time. So there are a number of different possibilities in terms of the impact of an effective ESG strategy.